Okay, we are now live. Now we will just wait for a few more people to enter the room. We will begin in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, we may begin now.
Okay, thank you, Aidu. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the second of our webinar series on international experiences in people-led housing. It's great to see so many participants have joined our second webinar of this series. This webinar is organized as a partnership between the Ateneo de Manila University Department of Sociology and Anthropology and my institute, which is the Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies, IHS, of Erasmus University in the Netherlands. Also, much appreciated is the collaboration of several other presenters whom you have met last week and will still meet in the coming 3 weeks. They come from grassroots people's organizations, partner NGOs, and university-based engaged academics in South and Southeast Asia, South America, and Europe. These webinars offer learning opportunities to several groups: undergraduate and graduate students of the two universities, urban poor communities interested or already doing people-led development, government officials and the general public, professionals and technical specialists advocating people-led housing approaches with urban low-income groups. Live cases will illustrate different forms of people-led social housing and the key principles of what makes them work. Two proponents from India and the Philippines will discuss their people's plan proposals to other specialists in the last webinar. Overall, we hope that participants will appreciate and champion this alternative form of development with vibrant, organized low-income communities taking the lead. While the people involved may seem as located on the fringes of society, in this people's civil society governed participatory planning process, people occupy the central space. Last week, we focused on theories from practice, and we had 3 presentations. One from Dr. Anna-Marie Karaus, who introduced the concept and development of community-led housing, particularly in the Southeast Asian context. And we had 2 case studies, one from Brazil on Funacom, presented by Claudio Ascioli, and one from the Netherlands on a project in Amsterdam by Richard Nissen. Both showed the importance, but also the challenges in creating partnerships between the public sector and communities, and the opportunities that these people-led processes offer in realizing good quality and affordable housing and urban environments. Today's session will focus on the government as a partner in supporting people-led housing, and will focus on the Philippines. Allow me now to turn to my co-facilitator of today, which is Professor Mary RACELIS. She's a professor at Ateneo, the Manila University, as well as a research scientist at the Institute of Philippine Culture. Mary works in partnership with NGOs, enabling them to define and pursue their own research needs and frames, so as to articulate more efficiently their rights and perspectives. Mary will join us later in the question and answer session. And if you have questions on the presentations, please post them in the chat, and then she will ask the guest speakers to answer them. Now, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce you to the first guest speaker of today and my partner in this series, Dr. Melissa QUETULIO-NAVARRA. Dr. Melissa QUETULIO-NAVARRA is an assistant professor in the Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines, and she teaches sociology courses. She has over 2 decades of government experiences in involuntary eviction, resettlement, and housing prior to joining the Ateneo faculty. During years in the government as head of the resettlement division, she designed, pioneered, and led government's participatory resettlements. She led the participatory intervention in 18 resettlement sites within a total of 30,000 families. Melis continued to work with the resettled communities and the informal settlers. She earned her master's in international studies from Kobe University, Japan, and her PhD in Wageningen University in the Netherlands. Dr. Navarra in her lecture will give an overview on the partnership between people organizations and the government in the areas of people-led housing and resettlement in the Philippines. Melis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, MAARTJE. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Let me share my screen. So good morning again to our participants in Europe, and good afternoon to our participants in Asia and the Philippines. My talk frames the upcoming presentations of Kapitan Mena and Eric on their experience in partnering with the Philippine government. Similarly, I also have the first-hand experience in partnering with our informal settler families and our resettled families when I was still working for the Presidential Commission for the Urban Poor, a government agency that looks after the plight of the government and the urban poor sector. The partnership between the non-state actors, the CSOs and the people's organizations and the government reflects the co-production theory of the Ostrom and the rest. Both parties who come from different sectors with non-redundant inputs attempted to produce together a good or service, in this case, the social housing projects and the services that rectified the sorry state of the resettlers. And as illustrated by the different forms of partnership, co-production pertains to the process and also the partnership as an outcome. Some also view this as the higher form of participation by target beneficiaries in development programs. So just a brief background on our housing program. So as shown in the figure, our country needs to produce 6.57 million housing units from 2017 to 2022. And by 2040, the demand increases by almost fourfolds. And out of the 6.5 million units, the informal settler families require 1.44 million, then another 1.98 by 2040. So it's very clear that the country at the moment is in a housing crisis, with the informal settlers are suffering the most. The country's 1.9 informal settler families, or ISFs, are residing in different areas, with majority of them located in danger areas. Danger areas mean living on top or along the waterways, sidewalks, along railroad tracks, below or on top of transmission lines, and even on top of water pipes. Our ISFs occupy these spaces. Most are considered precarious because these are the only spaces available and affordable for them. The government addresses informal settlements in several modes. So from 1950s to present, government resorts to slum clearance through eviction, as you can see in the picture on the left. Then the offsite relocation that started in 1960s, and offsite means transferring the families 30 to 50 kilometers away from their original residence. The on-site upgrading from 1970s to 1980s, and the community-led housing that started in 1990s. Among this, the stories on partnership with the government happened under the modalities of community-led housing and in the off-site relocation. The community-led housing approach started in the adoption of the Community Mortgage Program, or CMP, by the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council as a home lending program to be administered by the National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation in 1989. The idea was conceptualized in 1987 by former NGO workers in the Presidential Commission for the Urban Poor. During its first year of implementation, 3,199 ISFs were assisted, and averaging at 10,000 families a year thereafter. In 2004, the Social Housing Finance Corporation, or SHAFC, was created to administer the CMP. Under CMP, a registered community association can take out a community mortgage from SHAFC to acquire legal tenure through land purchase. CMP usually hinges on community cohesion, consensus, stocks of social capital, and the organizing, capacity building, and technical assistance provided by the NGOs all throughout the project cycle. In 2010, under the administration of President Benigno Aquino III, an opportunity to build on CMP and scale up the CMP model surfaced. This opportunity is actually a confluence of the 2009 Typhoon Ondoy that caused 789 deaths in the country, the Supreme Court mandamus on Manila Bay, issued in 2008, ordering the government agencies to rehabilitate, restore, and conserve the Manila Bay, and lastly, the 10-point covenant of the CSOs with President Aquino signed in 2010 that included no eviction without decent relocation, support for area upgrading and in-city resettlement, housing budget, post-Ondoy rehabilitation program, participation, and stakeholdership. Altogether, this political, environment, and social context underscored the need to relocate the 104,000 plus informal settler families in Metro Manila living in danger areas, particularly those living on top and along waterways like rivers and creeks, to safe places. And under this covenant, the relocation is preferably within the city, clothed with the elements of participation and strong stakeholdership. It is along this line that the President likewise allocated 50 billion fund at 10 billion per year for the provision of housing of ISFs living in danger areas. So to implement this Herculean task of massive resettlement of 104,000 plus ISFs with the 50 billion fund, the government set up a national technical working group on Upland LICAS, or Operation for Relocation, wherein along with relevant government agencies, the CSOs, or the civil society organizations, and the people's organizations are also members. In line with the covenant, a hierarchy of options for resettlement of the ISFs was established. So you have on-site, in-city, and off-city as the last resort. In 2013, in support of the objective of the 50 billion fund, SHAFC, the agency in charge of the CMP, launched the High Density Housing Program, or HDH. And under HDH, people's organization within Metro Manila affected by the Operation for Relocation program can apply for a loan for land acquisition and build low-rise buildings for their members within the city or in near site. Each family can apply for a maximum loan of 450,000 with 4.5% interest per annum and payable within 30 years. Meanwhile, the National Housing Authority, the agency mandated to produce housing for the lowest income earning sector of our society, tapped its community-based initiative approach as carrier of the People's Plan model. The People's Plan approach presents a clear delineation of roles between the POs and CSO and the government. So you have community organizing, social preparation, accessing financing, implementation and construction, even state management, as falling under the role of the POs, People's Organization, and their partner NGOs. On the other hand, we have the role of the government, the establishment of the high density housing program, the fund support, the technical assistance when needed, like in the design, in soil boring tests, the letter of support from the LGU and other permits that they need, and the coordination assistance. For example, if the POs or the partner NGOs need to meet with other government agencies or need to convene a higher level meeting, then it's a job of the partner agencies within the project to coordinate that kind of meetings. Despite these well-demarcated roles of the government, the POs and CSOs would complain of difficulty in setting up meetings with the government agencies or unsupportive government entities. They would also complain that there were times that they would be reprimanded by the government agency who supposedly should be their partner in the project. So the participatory design process enables people technically, like land research, building code, housing design, and creates a sense of belongingness to their community-led initiatives. It has also created multiplier effect while going through the process and generated also income generating options. An example of this is one project that also added rental units in their building so that there would be an income that would come to the people's organizations. The project also enhances the social capital stocks within and beyond the community, as evidenced by the networks in the government, academe, technical experts, church, and the civil society, whose resources they can tap and mobilize when needed. On the part of the government, the approach has contributed to delivering quality houses to our ISFs and has introduced them to active partnership. Here's
Manggahan Residences
one example. Sorry, there's an audio. One example of the product of partnering with the government, particularly the NHA now. So from 2013 to 2017, the People's Plan approach was able to benefit 21,117 informal settler families. So another story of successfully partnering with the government is the experience of the families were not included in the People's Plan or high density housing program, and were relocated to the usual off-site resettlement communities 30 to 50 kilometers away. The families complained that their resettlement story is from bad to worst or from danger zones to death zones, considering the lacking basic and social services in the sites and job loss as a byproduct of the displacement. The 30,000 families relocated under the Operation Resettlement Program were transferred to these 18 sites. Few are located in the National Capital Region, but majority are located in Region 3 and Region 4A. They wanted to lodge their complaints to NHA and the National Technical Working Group, but they could not because of the distance and lack of budget for the transportation. Eventually, the complaints about worsening poverty in the sites reached the Presidential Commission for the Urban Poor. PCUP is also mandated to monitor resettlement sites. The PCUP in 2015 deployed community organizers in the 18 sites, and together with the community leaders, residents, and partner NGOs, conducted participatory research and community organizing. The study yielded findings that would back up the earlier reports of the CSOs. No? There were widespread job loss, lacking basic services such as electricity and piped water, health centers, schools, accessible and affordable public transportation. PCUP, the people's organizations, and partner civil society organizations targeted to talk to the decision makers, NHA officials, and the lawmakers even. In the end, the chair of the Committee on Housing in the House of Representatives and Senate gave them opportunities to present their concern in 2 congressional public hearings in September and October 2016. As shown in the left picture, it was well attended by the civil society partners, relevant government agencies, the World Bank lawmakers from House of Representatives and Senate. Their concerns were likewise presented to the cabinet cluster. They demanded for the basic services, social services, and even livelihood assistance. In 2017, basing on the resettlement standards that should have been applied in each site, 1.8 billion was released as remedy funds for these 18 sites. It's the first time in the country. After the release of the funds, a program coordinating committee was created that included the leader representatives in each site. It is in this committee where the leaders give actual account of the implementation of the project in their site. Like they would report that the job fair that supposedly should take place in their site took place in the mayor's office instead. Or the livelihood kit that should contain materials worth 3,000 pesos would only contain materials amounting to 1,500 or 2,000. By 2019, some of the facilities they were waiting for, such as this secondary school in the picture, have been built. Meanwhile, by 2018, these resettlement standards that were established as a result of these 18 resettlement sites, corrective projects, have been adopted by the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development. So similar with the People's Plan approach, the 2 parties, state and non-state actors, had roles to fulfill. And between the 2 parties is the people's organizations who had more to sacrifice for the partnership, which includes their time away from their family or children or even work, for attendance in their interagency meetings and sometimes protests. So basing from the 2 stories, we have these gains to enumerate. Number 1, in-city multi-story social housing as a viable option. Previously, the government would question the capacity of the informal settler families to live and maintain a condominium type of social housing, and that they asserted that eventually it will down spiral to slum-like condition. However, our People's Plan cases say otherwise, and later on you will hear from Eric and Capitan Mena what makes it work. We also have the partnership template now. So this experience in housing and rectifying resettlement failures have given us templates on how the 2 actors can work together. We can continue to refine it and tailor fit it according to contexts. We also have groundswell support to in-city People's Plan bill. The 2 stories intensified why in-city People's Plan approach should be the option for housing our ISFs. No? We already have decades of experience to disprove that off-site will not work. And yet it's only now that we've accumulated this huge support. The bill has already been approved by Congress. We also have now the resettlement standards. And the cases also highlighted the role of the non-state actors, no? The CSOs, the POs, no? In the development work. It also underscored the efficacy of participatory program monitoring and evaluation. And lastly, we have the solidarity among the resettlement community leaders, which even up to now, the community leaders in these resettlement sites, numbering to almost 100 sites, have remained cohesive and united in their advocacies. So with the assistance of their partner NGOs, they meet online via Zoom to talk about urgent social concerns like the impact of the pandemic in their livelihood and what should be the interventions from the state. Nevertheless, the partnership is still problematic in several areas. So number one is question on the genuineness of the partnership. No? They say that the partnership is just a token partnership, or even the consultation is just token consultations. And also question why did the co-production didn't lead to guaranteed greater control of ISF's CSO over the development process and the resources. The 50 billion fund was supposedly a fund for in-city people's plan approach, but then a majority of the fund went to off-site relocation. And what makes the people-led development and the partnership with the government mechanism oppressive and inflict sufferings on the ISF sector? How can we address this? Lastly, of course, why is the root cause of the systemic housing and resettlement crisis remain unaddressed? So these are just some of the few questions that I hope you'll ponder on while you listen to the next speakers. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks a lot, Melis, for this overview. Well in time, well planned, and sharing these different experiences. Now let me introduce to you Capitan FILOMENA CINCO. FILOMENA CINCO is the barangay captain of Barangay 412. She's an elected government official who serves as the primary planning and implementing unit of the government policies, plans, projects, and activities in the community. A barangay, to those outside of the Philippines, is the smallest administrative division in the Philippines. CINCO is also the president of the Nakakaysang Mamamayan ng Legarda Incorporated. I hope I pronounced this well, which is a people's organization composed of families living in the waterways of Manila, along the waterways, that promotes and strives for the recognition of decent and safe housing for the poor. Her leadership paved the way for the in-city housing of 21 families along the Estero de San Miguel Legarda, and she's a staunch advocate for urban poor rights. Also, under her leadership, her barangay was awarded twice the most outstanding barangay overall category, which is an enormous achievement as you have almost 900 barangays in Manila. Capitan Mena will feature in her presentation the Nakakaysang Mamamayan ng Legarda's urban poor collective work for the People's Plan, a democratic process wherein the community decides where they want to stay, what type of housing they want, and what they can afford. And she will show how their initiative helped them to achieve decent and affordable housing in the city. Capitan Mena, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marte, for the generous introduction.
Sorry, 1 second. The sound is, we cannot hear you. Can you increase the volume?
Thank you, Marte. Can you hear me now?
It's still very far away. I do. Can you help out?
Yeah.
Oh, there she has.
Can you hear me now?
There.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very good. Yes, please, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marte, for the generous introduction. Good afternoon to everyone. I am FILOMENA CINCO once again, the Barangay Chairman of Barangay 412 in Sampaloc, Manila, and presently the President of Nakakaisang Mamamayan ng Legarda. Today, I will be sharing with you our people's plan in pursuing the in-city housing. We are the 4 steros, priority steros, and we work as one. But today, I will be focusing on my place from the Estero de San Miguel Legarda. So as you could see, the highlighted one, that is our place, the Estero de San Miguel Legarda. And the second one is from the Estero de San Miguel Picasal, the highlighted one. And thirdly, the Estero de San Miguel San Sebastian, And lastly, the Estero de Quiapo. This is our place in Estero de San Miguel. Estero de San Miguel Ligarda is a home for 167 families. Most of the families have been there for 2 or 3 decades. The houses are made of light materials. It is congested and there are dark tunnel spaces in the inner portion of the area, as you could see it in the pictures. Estero's small population is an advantage to know the neighbors very well. People act together on big and small issues, and this social capital is present in many ways. People help one another by taking care of the children while single parents are at work or in emergencies, and they can respond quickly in bringing the sick people to hospitals. This is our socio-economic profile done by the Urban Poor Associates. We have 29% for the vendors because most of us are vendors. Then we have the transport service, the 16%, skilled laborers, the 15%, they are the construction workers. And we have 2% from professionals. This is our children who graduated from college because we are near at public schools and university. That's why our children can go to college. And we have 1% government officials too. 94.2% are working in their community or barangay, or at least in Metro Manila, because the working place is just a walking distance from our home. Formation of nagkakaisang mamayan ng Ligarda. It was in the early 90s that the residents of Estero de San Miguel Ligarda had experienced their first threat of eviction from the government. Without knowing it, the residents had been informally organized in 1983 through a religious movement called Immaculada Concepcion Marian Crusade. In year 2000, the residents initiated their organization under the name of Samahan na Nagkakaisang Ligarda. In 2008, Urban Poor Associates organized Sistero. And in 2010, the residents of Ligarda decided to register their organization under the name of Nagkakaisang Mamamayan ng Ligarda Incorporated. NML began working with UPA in 2009. Various problems and challenges were encountered by the group. Mobilizations like Panunuluyan, Kalbaryo, and protests were carried out to prevent demolitions and to push the on-site housing proposal by Estero dwellers. Consultations with experts, preparations of conceptual plans designed by architect Palafox, a renowned architect that proved that in-city housing for sterile dwellers can be done. The design of architect Palafox is the inspiration for architect Zambrano housing designs for the NML families. At the beginning, the foresteros were separately registered to Security and Exchange Commission under different organizations' name, but worked together as one for their in-city housing. In 2011, the group formed a Estero Coalition, pinagkaisang alyansa ng samahan sa Estero or PASE. People's Plan. People's Plan is a democratic process wherein community meets and decides where to stay, in what type of housing, and how much they can afford with basic services and livelihood component. People's Plan, this is the tool that we use in pushing our in-city housing. These are our social preparation. This is our social preparation for our People's Plan. I will walk through the process so that you could understand how difficult it is for us to post affordable housing. In 2009, before UPA started organizing waterway communities, UPA, through its St. Thomas More Law Center, filed a motion to Supreme Court asking for a clarification of its pronouncement on the cleanup of Manila Bay that negates Urban Development and Housing Act of 1992. The UPA motion was addressed by the Supreme Court, saying that all demolitions and or eviction must comply with Section 28 of Republic Act 7279 or UDHA law. In 2010, we finished the Estero Master List, and we asked Architect Palafox to present the first Estero housing conceptual design. We were able to meet with President Benigno Aquino, and we presented to him our proposed on-site housing. And in 2011, we started land research. Geohazard Scoping Report furnished by Mines and Geosciences Bureau. And a 5-year shelter fund was released by DBM for the on-site shelter programs. We signed a memorandum of understanding with different stakeholders to implement the on-site housing project. In 2012, we conducted the soil testing through Department of Public Works and Highways. DSWD Secretary Dinky Suleiman then adopted the on-site shelter proposal of Estero de San Miguel Ligarda under the Disaster Mitigation Program. And in 2013, finally, groundbreaking of Estero de San Miguel was conducted. A proclamation number 689 declaring a certain parcels of land at Barangay 412 was declared a socialized housing for resettlement or relocation site of the NML. After 5 years, from 2009 to 2013, only 800 square meter was proclaimed. As you could see the dotted lines on the pictures, despite of frustration, the people continued land research for the housing of the families of foresteros. These are the land research we conducted. We continue to find, looking for land to house the estero dwellers. Those are the areas we visited. Among the proposed land by the PO or the People's Organization, the DOF not COCO property was bought by Social Housing Finance Corporation for the remaining 172 families. Of course, there are so many challenges we met. Budget constraint. The group wrote President Aquino to allocate another 160 million for land acquisition because the 700 million from DILG can only be used for construction, not for land acquisition. The lots identified by the POs for the in-city housing is higher than the government allocated budget for the cost of lands for socialized housing. Of course, there is the government bureaucracy. There are so many times that we feel that we are like ping pong balls. being directed to different agencies there, over there, and here again. So many times we are being frustrated because if we ask something from the different government agencies, it took time, maybe a month or 2 months or 3 months to the most before they answer to our requests. Constant threat of demolition continues while pursuing the in-city and despite of complete staff work for People's Plan. And finally, the President approved the additional funding we've been asking from him in 2015 for land acquisition and construction. The People's Organization is very happy. The People's Organization fought back against demolition through non-violent protests. And finally, on June 2016, the 21 families were awarded of their in-city housing by the partner government agency, the DSWD, which gives hope for the remaining 172 families. NML was successfully lobbied to the City of Manila to allocate funds for the installation of water and electricity. And now we're very proud to present the housing of the NML. This is the product of our sweat and blood. And these are the 21 families who benefited from this housing project, the in-city on-site housing. And there is Father Robert during the awarding ceremony. This is my old house along the Cerro de San Miguel. And this is my daughter, Maha, a special child. And Maha is not ashamed of our old house, but she cannot invite friends because she is afraid that they might fall on the stairwell because our floor is weak, made of wooden, old wooden. And now, this is the picture of our unit, the NML housing. There is my dream kitchen. And with my husband, we live comfortably and with a stable mind because our unit now are decent, affordable, and very durable. And most of all, dignified housing. While the Jesse M. Robredoville Homeowners Association, the remaining 172 families are now working with Social Housing Finance Corporation for their in-city housing. SHAFC bought 2,360 square meter land for the JMRV HOA housing. The group is waiting for the board approval of phase 2 construction implementation. People's Plan as tool for the in-city housing. An independent and economic participation is essential for the poor in fulfilling their dream of decent and affordable housing in the city. Although it is full of trials and tribulations, participation in housing development is what drives each member to appreciate and value the in-city housing. The collaboration with different stakeholders, such as the government, NGOs, academe, experts, and churches, are important in the realization of decent housing for urban poor. The People's Plan value poor people's voices. We have our recommendations. to create an independent agency that will be mandated to implement people's plan. It should have the powers to acquire land and construct. This agency will be given authority to decide on the proposed plans of the people, to make housing finance institution amenable to accept people's plan and to consider the affordability of the people for their monthly amortization, to allow Islam upgrading in the urban poor communities. Thank you so much. Maraming salamat po. Mabuhay.
Thank you very much, Filomena, for this very informative insights into the process and the achievement of the People's Plan in realizing affordable housing for the urban poor. Thank you very much. Now for the last presentation, we will move to Enrique Villanueva. Enrique Villanueva, or Eric Villanueva, is the program coordinator of the local governance program of the Institute of Popular Democracy. The program works on issues in essential municipal services, particularly on access to water and information. Access to water, information of community water services, cooperatives, local health services, and the formation of community health workers. Strengthening local employment services and the formation of workers' associations, and the formation of informal settlers housing cooperatives and associations, and preparation of people's plans for inner city or near city resettlements. Eric taught physics and mathematics at the Philippine Normal College and studied economics at the UP School of Economics. He also assists the task force Pahabay of Pasig City on public housing policy. Eric will share with us his experience and insights in setting up housing cooperatives that have benefited almost 10,000 informal settlers within Metro Manila under the 2012-2016 shelter program of the Philippine government. A housing cooperative is basically an association of persons or households who live together in a housing estate that they collectively own. The entire capital stock of the housing cooperative estate, the land improvements, and the housing units or buildings is collectively owned by all its members, and each member is a co-owner of the capital stock through shares. Okay, Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you, MAARTJE, and thank you, Melissa Navarra and Capitana Mena CINCO and Ma'am Mary RACELIS. Hello. I'm asked to discuss about housing cooperatives, but I realized that it's housing cooperative in the context of the People's Plan or the people-led housing. So let me start with cooperatives. I'd like to give first the main takeaway. All that I will be saying is that cooperatives are very good. Cooperatives are a distinct form of economic organization based on the solidarity of people of limited means. Worldwide, cooperatives are not small in a sense, no? Because our usual concept of cooperatives that these are small people's corporations, they say, no? But the rise of cooperatives was associated with working class movements and democratic development in the 19th century, no? In the now developed countries in Europe, no? And And so a movement aspiring for reforms in the Philippines, a progressive movement, a progressive agenda for reforms in the Philippines must include the development of cooperatives. So that's my main thing about cooperatives. And as applied by the housing cooperative model as adopted by many associations of informal settlers under the Kilos Moralita network was because the housing cooperative model it is coherent with the people's plan concept. Okay. So legally, this is the definition of a cooperative. An association of persons with a common bond of interest who have voluntarily joined together to achieve their needs and aspirations by making equitable contribution to the capital required, patronizing the products, and accepting fair share of the risks and benefits, which is based basically on the definition by the International Cooperative Alliance of a cooperative, no? As an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their needs through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. A housing cooperative follows that definition as one organized to assist or provide access to housing for the benefit of its regular members who actively participate in the savings program of for housing. It is owned and controlled by members. At least that's the way the law, the Philippine Cooperative Code defines a cooperative. That's not a sufficient definition, but that is in the law. So let us see exactly what a housing cooperative is. Next slide, please. Okay. Let's start by defining what another type of cooperative is. In a savings and credit cooperative, the members or savers, no? The members as savers and borrowers pull together their resources, no? In order to form a loan capital fund that they loan out to members. The owner of the capital fund, loan capital fund, are the members. The users of the lending service, because are the owner members. In the case of a consumer cooperative, the owners of a consumer store are the buyers themselves. No, just like in a credit cooperative, the users who are the borrowers are the owner members. In the case of a consumer cooperative, the buyers, no, as buyers, as consumers, are the owners of the business. Otherwise, it's just an ordinary lending corporation. Otherwise, it's just an ordinary store or grocery. If the capital owner, if the owners of capital or the source or suppliers of capital are the owners, which is usually the case in a common company model of an enterprise. Okay. Now, next slide, please. Now, a housing cooperative is one in which the goods produced are housing service or housing services. The users of that service, of that product, are the dwellers, who are the customers. And at the same time, they are the owners, they are the members of the enterprise and the owners of the enterprise. There are so many other stakeholders in a particular enterprise whose product is housing, okay? So you have SHAPSI, for example, a supplier of financing capital. You have the seller of land, no, the landowner. You have contractors that supplies the construction, and you have employees, no, that run the operation of the housing co-op. None of these stakeholders are owners. These members are suppliers, but they are non-members. The members of the housing cooperative are the dwellers themselves. As dwellers, as such, no, as dwellers, they own the enterprise, the housing cooperative. So otherwise, if the owner, which means if those who control the whatever residual surplus of the enterprise and those who make the decisions are not the dweller customers, are not the homeowners, but the owners of capital, then clearly it's not a housing co-op, it is just an ordinary developer corporation who supplies capital at the same time supplies the construction. Okay, so the critical idea is that in a housing cooperative, no, the users of that good produced by the enterprise, by the housing co-op, are the owners themselves. Just like in other types of cooperatives, like savings and credit cooperative and consumer cooperative, in which the users of the service are the owners of the enterprise itself, themselves. Okay, next slide, please. So in a way, in a sense, a housing cooperative is very similar to a condominium corporation, because in the condominium corporation, the members of the condominium corporation are the holders of ownership, the owners of the individual condominium units. Okay, they are the owners of the condominium, apart from their being owners of their respective condominium unit. Okay, but then there are differences, because it's quite possible that at the stage where the the condominium developer has not really sold all units, then they are part of the condominium corporations controlling it. No, and so in contrast, in a housing cooperative, from the very beginning, those who will dwell, those who will, yung titira doon, no, those who will reside or dwell or use the housing units produced by the housing cooperative are the controllers, owners, and members themselves. Next slide, please. Yeah. So these are various types of medium to high-rise buildings. So Ayala Vida is obviously a condominium. It's ruled, no? It's governed by a condominium corporation, I suppose. Now, the next is a Bliss Housing Project, so-called Bliss 3 Public Housing Project in Pasig City. It's financed by the City of Pasig. It is operated by the City of Pasig. Everything is owned and financed and owned by the City of Pasig, no? Except that the tenants, the dwellers, are under obligation to lease purchase, such that at the end of the period, they're supposed to be given titles, no, to their individual units. But then the city government owns the common areas and the land. Okay, so it's a very different type of housing, in the sense that it is the original developer, which is the city government, retains ownership of the common areas. Next is the Alpas 1, financed by SHAPC under the 50 billion program, no? 50 billion fund. It's managed by clusters of 6 homeowners associations in San Jose del Monte. But yeah, but there's a thing that SHAPC did that make it very, very infirm, no, as to actually owns the common areas of the estate, no. And then next is the Manggahan Residences operated by the NHA in Pasig. I think this is still a model in which the original developer is still the owner, except that the the family dwellers in each individual housing units are under obligation to rent to own or lease purchase the units. So none of these are classified as housing cooperatives, no, or call themselves housing cooperatives. Next slide, please. In contrast, look at these very social towers in Manhattan, in New York. All the buildings that you can see in this picture are called legally and commonly as housing cooperatives, except that they became housing cooperatives not as a response of people of limited means to acquire housing. No, these are the reason why they became housing cooperatives is that the celebrities that reside in these apartment buildings, want to capture the value created by their presence in this building. So they want the value they want to capture the value created by their presence. That's why they decided to pull together and own the entire collectively, the entire buildings collectively. Next. So I'll be describing two types of housing cooperatives. The type A housing cooperatives, or those that correspond to vertical development, and housing cooperative type B, housing cooperative type B that pertains to horizontal development. In a housing cooperative that's horizontal, there is not one-on-one correspondence between the unit owner and the land, because it's vertical nga. And so the entire housing estate, land, developments, and all the buildings and all the units are owned collectively by all dwellers and by the dwellers alone as dwellers. So for example, there are 72 units and there are 72 dweller members or dweller member families, And suppose that in the development of the building, they adopted the maximum socialized housing cost of 750,000 pesos. So
Eric, sorry, you have 3 minutes left. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my God. So capital is commonly held. Next slide, please. Next slide. Whereas in a type B housing cooperatives, the members cooperate in land acquisition, in acquiring capital, but not in the actual operation of the estate, because there could be one-on-one ownership correspondence between dweller and the land. So the cooperation is segmental, unlike in multi-dweller building, wherein cooperation has to be long-term and comprehensive. Next slide, please. So these are the generalized people's proposal. One feature is that the people's organization in the KM network want to take advantage of the site, if it's in city or near city site, for them to establish enterprises that could pay for estate management, because in people's plan, they're supposed to take care of the estate cost. And that is why they think that housing cooperatives, next slide, would be the most appropriate model. Next slide, please. So there are several advantages of a housing cooperative, because it reduces cost, because the members or dwellers collectively control it. Next slide, please. And so many associations of Kilos Moralita adopted it. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. No. So of the 30, there are around 30 associations, of informal settlers in danger zones that developed and submitted proposals. 14 were approved. Next slide, please. And the rest are trying to find new financing through pag-ibig and other means. Next slide, please. they mainly adopted in-city and near-city lot targets or location targets. Next slide, please. And the issues are basically this. No? Out of the 30 proposals originating from Kilos Maralita network, 14 were approved for financing. And of the 14, 3 have completed construction and occupancy. And the remaining sites are still under construction and delayed due to various implementation issues. So these are the issues: construction delays, non-resolution of dispute over land sale, conflict with local officials and local governments, conflict with the Social Housing Finance Corporation and developers, unresolved occupancy issue because of corruption in the board of these some of these housing co-ops, and very, very little progress in SHAPC high-density housing projects since 2016. Basically, no progress at all under the Duterte administration. Next slide, please. So possible solution. These are what we think are the possible solutions. Promote the people's plan approach and demand response to existing people's plan proposals. No to NHA, yes to people's plan by community association affected by infrastructure projects like the South Rail project, like those remaining in the danger zone, like the NLEX DPWH project. For those affected by the North-South Rail project, we think that people's plan have to be combined with transport-oriented development so that the housing projects can be near where future developments will happen, and that is around the train stations. Number 3, include all housing projects under people's plans, completed or not, under the resettlement governance program of DILG, instead of covering NHA cases only to address implementation delays and occupancy issues. Number 4, strengthen the accountability of community associations themselves. They need to strengthen their accountability and strengthen the interagency stakeholdership in people's-led housing. People's-need housing needs a state regulatory framework to make it happen. Kumbaga, people's-led housing will not happen under a less favorable policy environment or regulatory environment. So regulation is a form of support. So therefore, regulatory development has to come hand in hand with the push for people's-led housing. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And sorry, Eric, I made you rush through the last slides, but thank you very much for shedding light onto the concept of cooperative housing, how it works, and the legal framework in the Philippines, and sharing a wide range of examples. So thanks a lot. Now I would like to give the floor to Isabel GENGOS, who's a second-year AB Sociology student of the Ateneo de Manila University and an active member of the, I'm going to try my best, Kalipunang Sociologia at Anthropologia organization. Please correct me if I said it wrong. Isabel will share with us her insights and takeaways from the 3 presentations. So Isabel, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Ma'am MAARTJE, and thank you so much to our previous speakers, Ma'am Melissa, Sir Eric, and Kapitan Mena. Thank you so much for all your insights. For my brief reflection, I would just like to go back to what happened in the previous session on taking people-led housing from theory to practice in both developed and underdeveloped countries. But now we see that something that can be related to those countries and in the Philippines is that at the core of it all, we see that people cannot achieve their goal on their own because at the center, it is all about the people. Their drive is not enough to reach a goal. Their drive is very strong, but not enough to reach the goal of a well-executed and well-sustained housing program, which is why the external action from the government becomes something of utmost importance. So Ma'am Melissa opened us up to the conversation by showing us the history of housing programs in the country and the difference between the roles of the people and the government in the grand scheme of things. There is an importance in communication and networking, not just among the members of housing communities, but organizations as well that lead to major achievements in shaping local housing processes for the better. A lot of aspects of the community development process is reliant on its members, and there is a planning process that is vital. It can be seen as a lot of strong individual parts that come together as a whole, but it is hard to do without funding or without subsidy. Good housing within the city is also a priority, as can be found from the presentations given before this reflection. And collaboration is important, not just the government, but but other aspects as well, such as the academe, NGOs, and experts. All these are drives that influence their choices. Sir Eric followed this up by giving us a distinction between stakeholders and owners, as well as type A and type B, giving us a clear look at the kind of housing that we see around us. There is also an evident importance to the people's plan to give voices and choices on the people's own terms. So it is important that the community makes and meets decisions for their basic livelihood. And it is an important tool to use when talking about city housing or in city housing. So in partnering with urban poor communities, partnering is key. So this is evident in how Kapitan Mana recounted the journey to from when they started to where they are now, and basing off of the images that she presented, there can be so much that can be done with the aid of the government, and it does not have to end in a violent protest. And to see this is a great example of seeing the success story of what is now dignified housing. Excuse me. But partnering is not the end of it all, since there is again the question of government aid. So the government should be able to communicate and network effectively with the ISF community in order to make sure that the relocation site or programs that they have for the communities have the community's best interest at heart and are genuine for their long-term and sustainable conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Very good job. And now I will hand over to Mary for the Q&A section. So Mary, the mic is yours.
Thank you, MAARTJE. And let's move on. Let's move now to the participants who have been listening very patiently for the last hour or so. Perhaps it's Ido and Kaloy, I think, are the ones who are bringing out the questions. So let me ask Kaloy or Ido, have you sent those to me, or are supposed to be on the chat, although I don't really see them. Maybe Kaloy, you can start reading them yourself if you can see them.
I can click the chat button, Prof. Mary.
Okay.
Let's try to do that first.
Okay, here's one. The first one is that bukod sa proseso, I'll translate this later. Bukod sa proseso ng mismong pagtatayo ng bahay, anong mga paghahanda ang dapat gawin upang makatulong sa kanilang, now it disappeared. What happened to that question? It's on the chat. Yeah, I think, Kaloy, you have to find it. Where is that? Oh, you're translated already. Aside from the actual process of building their housing units, what are the proper preparatory, and it disappeared again. Oh, I'm back to the Filipino here. Anong dapat gawin upang makatulong sa kanilang emosyonal at psychological, lalo na sila'y lilipat, ayan, nawala naman. I think the question was, aside from some of the things I already mentioned, what about kind of the mental and sense of anxieties that urban poor have through these long processes where they are very often on the passive side, that is they're on the dependent side, not really knowing what is government prepared to do. So baka siguro si Aling Mena, baka Kap Mena, you can say yung pagtulong ng mga tao who are very anxious, di ba? Can you keep them organized to keep focusing on the aims of the organization? Kung takot sila, if they're afraid, if they're apprehensive, that their own well-being is being undermined, that they're not sure of themselves. Paano yan pag Aling Mena, if they're psychologically not sure whether anything is going to happen? Si Aling Mena, do you have comment?
Yes, Ma'am Mary. Pwede ako mag-Tagalog?
Yes, I'll translate for you.
Sige po. Bilang bahagi po ng samahan, kasi syempre po, andun po talaga yung pangamba. Lalo na ho naranasan namin, kasi kami nasa estero kami, waterways. So, pine-prepare po namin ang miyembro, nag-meeting, ano ang gusto ng bawat isa sa amin. Kasi hindi naman lahat ang option ay on-site in city housing. There are members of the association who opted to go off-city relocation. So we respected that. So given all the options ng bawat miyembro ng asosasyon, kailangan malinaw sa bawat miyembro yung option na gusto nila. What will be the consequences if they will choose option A or option B? So yung social preparation, whether it is off-city relocation or in-city relocation, should always be present. Para sa ganon, ang bawat isa na magiging ng beneficiary o yung tao mismo ang magdi-decide saan ba sila dadalhin. They should be always consulted. They should be always be part of the solution. Maging sa pagpili ng off-city relocation, dapat sila po ay kasama para po mabawasan yung anxiety, yung pag-aalala. Ibig sabihin nito, merong part ng ownership kung saan sila dadalhin. They choose a certain resettlement area, then fine, gusto nila yon. So yung anxiety, yung agam-agam, medyo mababawasan. Kasi sila ang pumili kung saan sila dadalhin. Whether it is off-city o in-city. Importante talaga ang social preparation sa bawat mamamayan na nag-advocate ng pabahay po. Yun po yung experience po namin. At syempre, group support ng bawat isa. Ito nga yung sinasabi nating social capital na nakahawak tayo sa isa't isa, magtutulungan tayo sa isa't isa. We can lean on each other. Kahit ano pa yan, off-city man yan o on-city siya, ay nandyan ang bawat isa sa ating samahan.
Thank you very much. I think probably many of you got that, whichever language you were speaking, but let me just, the high points I think that Kap Mena is responding to is the importance of recognizing that people are fearful, often because they don't know what the options are. If they don't know what the consequences are of whatever option they choose, they're going to be very anxious. So the importance of information is very clear. Discussion among the group itself, as well as with those who have the information, and through their solid unity, beginning to clarify where can we move together? The ones who want to do my option, how can we move together? And that's where the sense, once that decision is made, based more or less on information and a sense of ownership and commitment, then is established. I think that's part of what she said. But Eric, you've had to work with communities in the same way. Would you like to add something on that? The anxiety or the emotional side of social preparation. We can't hear you. I think you're muted, Eric. You're muted.
Sorry. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
go.
I think the psychosocial and emotional addressing those aspects are very, very, very important. However, in our experience, the coalition that's assisting the informal settlers that were assisting the informal settlers organized and come up with a plan are the so-called political blocs. So these are the so-called political blocs of the democratic left. So these are activist organizations. And what they emphasize is that this is a part of the struggle for human rights, and housing is a basic human right, and that we should know our rights in embarking in this project, because otherwise, if we don't know our rights, there will be institutions and forces that will take advantage of us and bilk us and try to exploit us and oppress us if we are weak politically. And so in order to develop unity, we have to raise our political awareness and to know our rights. And somehow, through that, we just didn't address psychosocial and emotional aspects, except among themselves. No, I think of course among the leaders, they try to support each other emotionally, and somehow our organizers involved in that, but that's not part of our intervention mainly.
Right, I think you've added very important insight here, that beyond the immediate issues that communities have to face is the larger context, the larger political context, and the notion of rights. And what I've seen over the many years of these kinds of struggles, how the notion of the right to the city, which now most POs are very strong in saying, we have a right to the city, we have a right to housing and decent services, and so on. All right, another question or comment? You want this? All right, so keep this one here. Maaari niyong bang ipaliwanag ang proseso ng community organizing para maging handa ang mga tao sa mamuno sa proseso ng pabahay. Paano niyo ito ginagawa para lahat ng nasa komunidad ay magposibilidad na makilahok sa prosesong ito? So the question is, what is this process of community organizing that both of you have spoken of? What does it really take? How does it happen? Would you like, well, let's let Capmana start, and then we'll ask Eric to continue. And of course, Melis too. Huh? Go ahead, Kapitana, would you like to start? Ano ba yung prosesong na community organizing? Ano yan?
The process of community organizing is to engage all the families living within the community. Wala pong dapat na iiwanan na miyembro ng komunidad na hindi po i-involve. Kasi karapatan po nila na malaman ano ba ang plano. So they should have the say. May boses po sila, kaya po tayo i-organisa po natin ang ating samahan. Unang-una, kailangan malaman natin gaano kalaki ba ang ating community, ilan ang members ng ating community, ano ang kanilang hanap buhay. So lahat po yun, kasama po yun. At bukod po doon, ano ba ang kakayanan ng bawat isa. Para sa ganon, kapag nag-organisa po tayo ng samahan, alam natin ang kakayanan natin lahat at ano ang gusto nating mangyari sa ating community. So kinakailangan lahat ng bawat isa ay marinig ang kanilang boses para sa ganun pagsamasamahin ang lahat ng makokolekta nating mga ideya, opinion, para sa ganun isa lang po ang lakad o isa lang po ang patutunguhan ng isang samahan. Ibig sabihin, organisado na sila, alam nila ano ang gusto nila, alam nila ang kanilang kalakasan, alam din nila ang kanilang kahinaan, at higit sa lahat, alam nila kung sino-sino at ilan ang kanilang miyembro sa samahan na yun. And aside from that, yung pong pag-organisa, kasama na din po yung pag-e-educate, hindi lang po sa leaders, kundi sa lahat ng member. Ano yung mga magiging responsibilidad o counterpart po nila. Sa tulong po ng aming partner NGO, na organisa po kami, napalakas ang aming samahan sapagkat tinulungan din po nila kami na malaman ano-ano yung mga batas na magpoprotekta sa aming mga karapatan. So yun po yung mga hakbang na ginawa namin base po sa aming experience na naranasan umpisa sa pagpapalakas, pag-oorganisa ng samahan hanggang sa iisang direction para po sa kapakanan ng lahat ng miyembro ng samahan po.
Okay, just very quickly, first you get people together, involve everybody insofar as possible in the community, no one left behind. And by all being together eventually and taking small scale actions at the beginning, you begin to form a sense of community and you organize somewhat more formally a samahan, an organization, an association. And from there you move on because you're on the basis of knowledge, which often the NGO partners can provide, can help them with, then they can take action, and from the action they gain strength. Should I get Eric, or would you, Melise? Maybe you would, you would like to say something at this point, and then I'll ask Eric. Okay, let's get Melise to say something because she's been much involved in that.
Yeah. Community organizing is making people understand this the affected families that they have power that they can use over their circumstance. Like for example, if they're threatened with eviction, they have this agency that they can use so that they can avoid the demolition or even delay it, and later on realize that they can come up with a counter proposal that will lead to housing, security of tenure. It always starts with meetings. So that's why CAP-MENA, I think I read somewhere that they took like 500 meetings, took 500 meetings just for that San Miguel People's Plan building to get built. So it really takes a very long time, but they don't know that during that time that they're meeting, that they convene and they meet with different stakeholders, they're already building their capacity to address their issues, and also not just capacity, also knowledge that they know their rights, they know the rights that they can invoke to the government, they can demand. And also they build their social capital. They widen their networks that later on they can draw the resources from. So it takes a very long time, but then it has multiplier effect and it has sustainable outcomes.
Yes, thank you. Let me just say, as we turn over to Eric, that, the word that you raise of demand, in the early days when people were relatively powerless and not organized, it was always request, please, appealing and so on. But with the process of organizing, and here, whether it's the NGO or a leftist party group that's enabling people to see they have the capacity, here are some of the things that are possible they need to decide on, and they can take action and declare victory as it, right? So it's, and that, as Eric already said, is very much based on the beginning awareness that, hey, wait a minute, We don't have to beg. It's our right, etc. So Eric, last comment, and then we'll have one more or two.
Community organizing means organizing the community so that they can make consensus. They can develop the community consensus on what to do and to manage that consensus or to revise that consensus if need be. So it's basically about management of decisions or what they want. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact I know that Aling Manny has said this many times to me before, that when they're together, then they kind of police each other, because as they pointed out, when money comes into the picture and people are offered, possibly, and they are poor, what a choice. But the solidarity and the involvement of everybody is a social control that really monitors and makes anyone who wants to make personal profit a bit hesitant to do that. So that's another part of the unity, I think, that you've been mentioning. All right, another one. Is this on? Question. All right, the challenge to people's plan. Well, this is from Krieger Bonogua. I should have mentioned some of these names. Krieger, a well-known person in community organizing and in government service too. The challenge in people's plan is how to advocate and lobby for the alternative that the people have developed. Thus, it's always accompanied by conflict, confrontation, and pressure tactics such as rallies, etc., which is political in nature. Very good point. You really cannot separate out kind of the socially related issues to what is essentially a political process of leveling the playing field for social justice purposes. Would somebody like to comment on that? Eric, yeah.
I'll pass.
Wait, here's something that maybe this is connected. Preventing a shift, what's happening, a shift from the centralized NHA-led public housing production to a policy and program environment that supports people planning. Why can't the government identify in-city land and develop a more robust financing model? In other words, why is it always up to people to have to fight for this when government has the capacity and should have the responsibility for identifying land for social housing? That, I think, is where we can ask Melis if you would come in.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question, because I was telling you a while ago when we were preparing for this session, like even if we have the law, people's plan law, even if we made it a law, for as long as we don't have available lands, or if we have lands, we don't make them available for the people, and we don't have robust financing, like it's affordable for everyone, then people's plan will be a failure. Because right now, people's plan can only be affordable for families earning with combined income of 10,000 or 8,000 plus. Well, most of our families in low income, they only have like 5,000 at the average. So people's plan as it is not affordable, right? Plus, you have this bigger question of where are the lands? That's why it takes a very long time for our POs, for our people's organization, to find lands. Because sometimes you have to butt heads with the LGUs who also have interests towards the land. Not only with LGUs, even government agencies who act like they're private corporations. So we can only make this work if you have lands available for our ISFs, and we know our ISFs, we know their magnitude, so that nobody will be left out. And we have financing that will be suitable to any income level.
Yeah, so you're saying the political will of government becomes crucial in terms of policy orientations that actually enable people's plans to bear fruit, because there's a support system. Eric, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'd like, yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, I'd like to add something. Yes, that's a very important point. No, those that can afford socialized housing through the people's plan process or not, no, are must have a certain level of capability. No, as Melissa said, somewhere between 8 to 10,000 or 12,000 family income. How about those that are earning less than, say the proverbial family that's earning $2 a month? No, so so I think part of the movement for justice, for example, for the reform movement should not should emphasize that the government respond to the various people's plans proposals issued by informal settlers, but also to anticipate the housing needs of those that could not even afford nor have the capacity to come up with the people's proposal at all. No, and so the demand, uh, the call must be for the government to support people's housing, people's plan housing, as well as to produce lots and lots of public housing, wherein the dwellers are not expected to lease purchase, but to rent at a very, very minimal fee. Say, like the experience in Valenzuela, Kasiglahan, no? I uh, that there should be more of that, no? There should be more of housing that demands from the very poor only a very small amount, no? So that they can be transferred immediately to these places. So housing, the people's movement for people's plans should support public housing as well. Thank you.
Aling Mena, siguro, we'll give you the last word. I think we probably have to make this the end, but Kap Mena, paano yon? Yung mga grupo nyo na talagang hindi maka-afford, yung kasi people's plan, the government requires NHA, if it's doing it, or SHFC, SHFC, requires people to pay substantial amounts. I mean, they have to have amortizations every month. That's always an issue, especially now in the pandemic, right? So paano yan? Yung mga talagang hindi maka-afford.
Sa amin pong karanasan, lalong-lalo na po dito sa Jesse Robredo homeowners po namin, ito yung phase 2 ng aming People's Plan Housing na kung saan yung 4 na priority zero ay nagsama-sama na po. Mga 172 families po ito. At the very start, kasama yung preparation talaga doon na itong People's Plan natin ay ganito ang magiging monthly amortization ninyo. So may mga estate management na po at may mga pinag-usapan na po. Sa ngayon po, kasalukuyan po, bawat miyembro po ng JMRV ay meron po silang mga savings na po. In preparation, in-anticipate na po yung paghuhulog po nila monthly sa amortization and other expenses. Bawat isa po sa kanila ay nag-savings na po. So ang savings na po ng ating Jesse Robredo para masagot po na walang maging delinquent sa kanila po ay almost more than 1 million na po. Ito po yung communal savings po nila. Pinaghahandaan po to ng bawat pamilya. So yung hindi po talaga makaka-afford, natansya na rin, na-identify na po nila ilan yung pamilya na ang kakayanan lang, ang income lang ay nasa 5,000 to 7,000 monthly. Meron pong gagawin o meron pong programa para sa kanila. They are the priority families na bibigyan po o tutulungan, i-assist ng livelihood ng association po mismo. Kasi may nakaprograma na po ano yung mga magiging livelihood. At syempre, sa pabahay po ng JMRV, katulad din po sa amin ay kailangan ma-mindset yung mga tao. So, syempre sa tulong din po yan ng pag-oorganisa nga po, yan po ay na-identified sino-sino ba at ilan itong mga pamilyang ito na ang monthly income lang ay 5,000 to 7,000. Meron pa nga pong pamilya na 4,000 lang po yung income nila. So may intervention na po ito sa tulong din po ng aming partner NGO. May mga plano na po kung paano aalalayan o bibigyan ng assistance ang mga miyembro na hindi kaya na ang kanilang monthly income ay 5,000 to 7,000 lang po. Kasi ang magiging monthly amortization ay syempre i-shoulder po nila yan. So meron na pong mga intervention o programa o plano po sa bawat isa po. Kasi nagkaroon po ng parang financial, ano yun, yung pag-identify, ano-ano yung kakayanan, ano-ano yung family income nila, joint family income, para sa ganon may intervention pong gagawin in case na sila po ay umakyat na po doon sa kanilang housing. Gagamitin din po sa ngayon yung kanilang, bago sila umakyat, at least meron na po silang 1 year na savings for the amortization para po sa SHFC. So ganun po yung mga ginagawa namin. Ganito din po sa amin kasi meron din po kaming binabayaran. Those members o yung pamilya po ay sila po yung aming kinukuhang tagawalis ng aming community kasi meron po kaming binabayaran na maintenance fee kasama po yung aming counterpart po namin kasi yung pagbabayad dito sa mga insurance. So yung pamilya pong yon, sila po yung aming pinapayagan na magkaparang sweat equity, magwalis, magayos, mag-maintenance para po sa ganun yung kanilang maintenance fee ay yun po. In terms, hindi po namin sila babayaran ng pera kundi doon po parang sweat equity, yun po yung kanilang contribution doon po sa monthly maintenance fee po namin. So ganun po yung mga ginagawa po namin.
All right, so the basic message is that the organization, and she's also the kapitan, which means she also has the local government strengths behind her, government, is you identify those who are below the people's plan, which requires a certain amount of funding. Those who are below that, they make a point of identifying who those are, enabling them to get perhaps training, capital for their own earnings so that they can save. And in fact, the whole community is saving. And that way, gradually move up. But I think nonetheless, and I think it's very important when you have a local organization that's strong, they can cover almost everybody because they reach out, they care, and they find, solutions. They hire them to be the street sweepers whom they pay. But I think we have to go back to Eric's point that there will always be people left out at the quote bottom, and government has to concern itself with that. And you pointed out low-income rental housing, other mechanisms. One interesting thing is before the people had to pay the land cost also. So it was enormously expensive, but now it's done on a lease basis. So the land remains with government, but there is a title to the structure of which it's a part. Manus, would you like to say the last word? And then we have to close this because although there are some very interesting questions.
Yeah. Okay. There's a message here. It should be, there should be the people's planning and the advocacy for in-city and on-site development should be an electoral agenda in 2022. That's according to Vince and Krieger, and I agree. Yeah. So we already have, the building blocks, for people's plan. It's already well known. We have templates, we have mechanisms to build on. So we just keep on moving forward and not really regressing and slipping back to where we came from, that, it's off-site resettlement, automatic. Now, our call is really to make it affordable and for the lands to be available. And for everyone, if they decide if it's a people's plan approach, if it's high density housing, that they can be part of this approach of this project of the community.
Good. So I think this one question that raised, making it a an electoral issue, especially local governments, because they're the ones who are supposed to identify land for social housing, and many have not. And one question was, why is it that Quezon City has been able to do that, and so many of the other cities around, even Metro Manila and beyond, have not? You know, what is it? Well, is it political will? Well, who knows? But what the suggestion seems to be is, if the urban poor mobilize to make it an election issue, that's what Eric is saying, then maybe it'll count, you know, then they'll pay attention. And and the local government, they are their constituents, so they can't avoid it in principle. Well, I think this has been a very interesting session. I hope, MAARTJE, that those of you who are not familiar with Filipino got sufficient understandings of what was going on. So let me now, should I turn it back over to you, MAARTJE, for a last statement?
Yeah, if you want me to, that's fine. I think now, thank you all for a very interesting session. And it's going to be very interesting what the Indian, particularly the Indian case, because it's a totally different context, which lessons they will learn from yeah, you're in Philippines very far ahead with this people's plan, what they can take on board to develop something similar in India. But thank you all very much. It's quite late already, so thanks for all the contributions. Thanks to all the participants, and looking forward to seeing you next week.
All right, and don't forget, next week you have to register again for that session. And if you please answer the evaluation questionnaire, that probably will come your way, which would be make us very happy, because then we can see where do we need to go in the next 2 sessions. So I think that is it for everyone. Thank you very much to the presenters and to the participants. I'm always sorry that we can never get to all the questions, but you know, we see them, and so it becomes part of this discussion. So I think we'll stop here. We will say thank you and see you next week.